In Dead by Daylight, 4 survivors are hunted by a ruthless killer, being chased and sacrificed to the entity by means of downing and hooking them. No 2 killers are as efficient at this task as the nurse and the Blight. The nurse has been terrorizing Dead by Daylight for 9 years, joined up at the top by the Blight when he released in 2020. Armed with a teleport that can go through walls and an extremely fast dash respectively, these 2 killers are fast, relentless, and invalidate many loops in the game, making matches against competent mains of these 2 feel hopeless. So, why haven't the devs just nerfed these characters? Everyone knows they're broken. Most people complain about them. Are the devs just stupid? Maybe, but I want to offer another explanation. One that'll help you sympathize with all of these lazy developers out there that won't just nerf the broken characters in their games. I like to call this the Wrastor Paradox. For those unaware, Wrastor is broken. Everyone who plays Rebels of Aether knows this. In a platform fighting game that rewards good movement and combos, he's a character with amazing speed and amazing kill power, only really having the drawback of being one of the most difficult characters to pick up. The devs over at Aether Studios are very transparent though, having claimed that Wrastor was simply too difficult to nerf in Rivals 1 because it's basically impossible to balance him at the highest level of play without destroying his lower end player base. And from personal experience, I can definitely see it. My Wrastor is garbage, and throughout my time playing Rivals, I've only seen 2 players rise up to be notable Wrastor players due to how demanding and punishing he is at lower levels of play. In the transition to Rivals of Aether 2, the devs took a stab at nerfing Wrastor by hitting his combo and kill power, and now he's still the least played character in the game, on top of his mains not really enjoying playing him. I'm not going to call him a bad character because he's still Wrastor, but they definitely gave him some of that Skull Merchant treatment of saying, this is toxic, let's just... Yeah. Wrastor's main defining characteristic is that he is fast and has strong combo aerials that lead into kills. So there really wasn't much to nerf except for these characteristics, which ended up turning a lot of people off of the character. This situation is why I think BHVR is so hesitant to nerf the Blight and the Nurse. Similarly to Wrastor, Blight and Nurse are fast and relentless through the use of their unique chase powers. But these traits are basically all they have, and what makes these killers so fun to play in the first place. There simply aren't enough levers of balance to adjust with these 2 that would both introduce meaningful counterplay while keeping them fun at all skill levels. Looking at a killer like the Karasu, who is extremely broken and easy right now, they could realistically touch a lot of different aspects of her kit without nerfing her head form and make her a fair and fun killer to face, even though they probably should still nerf that form. So, because a nerf to their core powers is likely to alienate and upset a large pool of players that play these killers, that's why the Nurse and Blight are still as strong as they are today, with no nerf seeming to be in sight for them. So, if you aren't going to nerf them, what can you do? That's right, you can rework them. That's always worked very well in the past, so let's look a little bit closer at what you can do to make both these killers fun to play and fun to fight. In 2025, a DVD YouTuber named Kaito told the community on how fun each killer was to play and face. And using this data from players of all skill levels, you can see that killers that are beloved by both survivor and killer players are chase killers that have clear and concise tells on when they're using their powers, while getting punished pretty heavily for missing them. Both Blight and Nurse fit into this relatively well, except for the fact that their chase powers are simply too strong for them to get punished super hard for messing up, since they can almost immediately catch up to you after fatiguing. So, instead of nerfing their chase powers, I think they could keep that stapled chase strength by taking the Oni approach, keeping their basically unfair chase powers, while introducing an amount of setup that the survivors can work around. So, here's what I would do to rework these killers, while still keeping them strong and appealing to existing and newer players. Starting with the Nurse, I really tried to give her a power charging mechanic that works with her entire breath motif, by taking breaths from survivors, while also trying to keep it distinct enough from the Oni taking blood. So, to get started, the Nurse would be a 4.6 killer at base, moving at 3.45 while taking the breaths of survivors, and 3.85 when her blink power is active. For clarification, survivors move at 4.0 meters per second while running, 4.6 is a default for basic killers, making them faster than a survivor they're chasing, while anything under 4.0 causes them to lose distance. The first two stats are derived from the Oni exactly, and the last is unchained from the nurse's current base movement speed. I considered making the nurse 4.4, but since she is powerless for a lot of the match, I think she could use the extra speed if not just to patrol generators, but also to be a bearable killer to loop survivors with when she doesn't have her blink. Again, the goal is to give the nurse counterplay and set up to her power, not to nerf her into the ground. So that begs the question, how does the nurse get into her power? Well, that comes from taking enough breaths from the survivors. I would make it so aside from a small passive charge that increases for every survivor that is injured or exhausted, up to 50%, the nurse would gain charge by stealing breaths of survivors that she has a direct line of sight with, similar to Myers and Ghostface's powers, also getting a small boost when a survivor screams because the flow of air. This stealing of breath would hinder survivors very slightly, making it obvious when the nurse has line of sight on survivors so that she is not fully ripping off Myers and Ghosty's whole stalking shtick. Once the nurse gains enough charge from stealing breaths, she will immediately enter blink mode, channeling Spencer's last breath to slow down her movement speed and gain access to her 2 blinks for 45 seconds to a minute. This focus on line of sight as a counter to her charging her power doubles as a sneaky way to teach players the best counterplay to her blink attacks, as well as putting some extra important on stealth so that survivors don't feed the nurse her power for free. So, I'll admit, I've been pretty modest with the power level of this rework, not trying to nerf the nurse too much because, to be honest, I really love playing her, but this rework gives the nurse a lot more levers of balance to manipulate, while also making it so she spends time playing the game like other killers. It also teaches newer players the counterplay with a blinking nurse, which could help players that don't watch enough DVD content to know her generally accepted counterplay. The new levers of balance introduced here are how fast she charges up her power, the passive charge as a slight buffer for newer players, the amount of uptime she has in her power, and the amount of downtime she has out of her power. All of these values can be adjusted over time to allow nurse players the insanely fun power fantasy of blinking through walls to injure survivors, while also giving survivors a break from her game-breaking chase and allow them to form a more solid game plan when going against her. So for anyone who is well aware and acquainted with the Myers rework at this point, I just want to say I wrote this video a full month before that even came to a PTB, so maybe I'm onto something, or maybe I'm not onto something, depending on how much you like the Myers rework. But it makes sense. They basically did the opposite of what I'm proposing here. Instead of putting setup onto a strong chase power, they added a strong chase power to a long setup. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. Now, moving to Blight. While my conceptual nursery work takes a lot of notes from more modern DVD killer designs, the Blight concept I've thought up is definitely more original. Something I've noticed about the Blight is that every time he runs into an obstacle, he leaves behind some remnants of his pustula serum. So let's make it so he has to pick it back up. My idea is that Blight starts with like 15 to 20 charges of Blighted Rush, but once he fatigues after using up to 5 at one time, all the charges he used in his previous rush are stored in his last slam location. This Blight infection takes a few seconds to fester enough to allow the Blight to reclaim it by hitting it with an attack, which either gives survivors time to potentially escape chase, or forces the Blight to leave it behind to continue chase, giving the survivors downtime in the future once the Blight comes back to reclaim it. If the Blight has less than 5 charges of his pustula serum, you'll be a standard M1 killer until he comes back to reclaim it. I think this is a very interesting rework because it creates zones on the map that the survivors do not want to be near, creating some interesting map pressure, while still giving survivors more workable downtime and the ability to actually escape chases against a Blight. This also gives Blight more micro and macro management potential, as he would need to go for the least amount of rushes per chase and attempt to zone survivors towards his Blighted infections to increase his rush capacity and minimize the amount of downtime between chases. Also, if you want to introduce some fun tech with this concept, which I would do through an add-on, you can make it so that hitting an infection immediately recharges all of your rushes without breaking your current rush, allowing Blight to do drive-by collections and hit insane lines around the map, giving him even more skill expression. New levers of balance introduced here are the amount of rushes the Blight starts with, and how much time Blight has to wait to reclaim his charges after they're placed down, which is not a ton of levers to work with, but is very intuitive and impactful when considering what aspects of the Blight you want to change. This rework would also allow you to make Blight 4.4 and for it to actually mean something, which I'm not advocating for, but is a possibility with this. So, those are my proposed reworks to these two extremely powerful killers that are really hard to nerf. I think Dead by Daylight is a very fun game to analyze the game design of, because as a whole, the game is a huge mess that shouldn't work, but strangely does. So I wanted to throw my hat in the ring to see what could be done about these two problematic killers. And even if you disagree with my exact rework ideas, I think it's pretty clear at this point that the Blight and the nerfs are going to stay around the same power level without a rework, because right now their only lever of balance is their fun to use chase powers, which is really the only thing they have going for them. So without multiple avenues to go down when it comes to nerfing these characters, it's hard to see there being a way to nerf them without pulling back on what makes them so fun in the first place and tanking their existing player base. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think about what I've said in this video. Whenever I talk about game design, I really like engaging with the comments and seeing what you guys are all saying and broaden my own understanding of the games I talk about and game design as a whole. Maybe Wrastor is still OP, and maybe the nerfs only needs to be unable to see auras while blinking. So, yeah, thank you all very much for watching.